Greetings, everyone. My name is Trushar Patel. I'm one of the volunteers with the Canadian Science Policy Centre, or shortly known as CSPC. I work at the University of Lethbridge as an Associate Dean and Canada Research Chair in iron and protein biophysics. We are lucky to have us, Dr. Mario Pinto, today with us. Dr. Pinto is at the University of Manitoba, Vice President Research and International. Before Dr. Mario Pinto came into University of Manitoba, he has held several leadership positions, including answer some of the international positions as well, and has a lot of experience starting with chemistry on carbohydrates and going to all the way with flourishing research career. So with that, Dr. Pinto, we are lucky to have you here. And I will ask you a couple of questions and we have a normal conversation, and I welcome your suggestions and so on. So one of the questions, yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here. Let me begin by saying that the University of Manitoba is, of course, located on Indigenous lands. And I would like to pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples.
So one of the questions when I was preparing for your conversation that came up was your thoughts on models of innovation that are representing the reality. How can we come up with different ways to solve the current challenges in a way? Yeah.
I've thought a lot about this, and I've put different models into practice. And so I've arrived at a model that rings true, that resonates with the reality of how research and innovation works. Okay? And very often you'll hear about this duality of fundamental research versus innovation or commercialization. And I think that's false. It's a false narrative, and it's because one does not have to have those subdivisions. So let me explain.
Yeah.
A few years ago, Robert Dines, when he was president of the University of California system, redefined the pathways in terms of R and D, so two Ds. And he said we had forgotten that it wasn't just about research and development, but research and development and delivery.
Delivery.
So delivery for economic impact and societal impact. I have taken that model and superimposed on it the bidirectional flow between R and the first D, and D and the second D, and then the second D all the way back to R.
To research, yeah.
So that there's a bidirectional flow, and one does not have to get obsessed about which sector one belongs to. Sometimes beautiful discoveries emanate from the laboratory, from R. Sometimes it's a global change, climate change, for example, or a market force that then drives academics to think very differently about new research questions and then feed the pipeline. But it's very much a bidirectional flow, and that's the way things actually work for optimization on the pathway from ideas to invention to innovation. So why fight it, right? Why get obsessed about which sector do I belong in? Because in reality, if you choose to, you could go back and forth, and you can respond to different challenges, and one can enter the ecosystem at different points. And so it's an ecosystem where everyone is comfortable and operates to the extent of their comfort level. And in fact, that's how it works. So this is the model of innovation that I use, and one has to, of course, prepare people to take this challenge on. So you start with students, entrepreneurship skills, and not assuming that they have entrepreneurship skills. So you teach them the entrepreneurship skills. Faculty, if they're going to enter into the innovation space, they have to change their basis set. It's no longer an academic basis set. You have to do go, no-go experiments at the front end. As academics, we like to prolong the research program, but you can't do that if you're going to do true innovation. So when I ran my incubators and accelerators, my motto was kill it quickly. Sounds brutal, but you do the critical experiments first. So I'll give you a practical example. If you're developing a drug and you want to optimize further, there's no point in proceeding until you check that drug in cell systems and preferably in animals to look at bioavailability. So that's the experiment you do first.
First.
Because if that's not working, then you know that you have to change that drug candidate. So I think the whole idea is to be prepared for the challenge, but admit that there are different deliverables and timeframes when you work in the different sectors. The best way is to work with partners, right? You bring in industrial partners, government partners, NGOs, right, community partners, if you're serious about innovation
Delivery.
or social innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a great perspective, and I really appreciate that. So, with that perspective, I have a second question. What are your suggestions on the necessary versus sufficient principles in finding out solutions for societal challenges? And some of the answers you already gave, but I would like your perspective.
That's a very good question, you know. So I think you'll hear often the phrase solutions for society, and coming mainly from our political leaders, but also coming from the general public. So it's a call to action for academics, and there's no point dodging it because we have what it takes
To
to
address
provide
this.
solutions for society, right? Some of us may be more shy than others. It may not be for everyone, but in principle, we're trained to be problem solvers.
Yeah.
And so to provide those solutions to societal challenges. So how does one go about this? And in reality, the goalposts have moved with major funding competition. You'll admit, I think, that you can no longer be a solo researcher if you're going to solve a problem of such magnitude. You have to bring in an interdisciplinary approach, right?
Yeah.
Many partners. And so while the days of measuring and monitoring may have been necessary at one time, they may not be sufficient to provide the solution that you're after.
Yeah.
So it's bringing together this ensemble of actors that makes it work. And really, it's the disparate disciplines working together that will lead to innovation that will result in solution of problems in society. So this is based on an old concept advanced by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall,
Okay.
who talked about two-eyed seeing. One eye would bring in the indigenous view, traditional ways of knowing. The other eye would bring in the Western view, and one would synthesize those two, and that holistic view would lead to a productive way forward. Albert went further, and most people don't realize this. He talks about that frustrated interface when you bring those two viewpoints together.
Yeah.
And he points out that it's out of that frustration that true innovation grows. And so it's forcing those disparate disciplines to talk to one another and to really come up with something original. So in my view, we have a multi-eyed approach, very disparate disciplines coming together, and that will in turn provide solutions for society in a short time frame, right? You could take the slow road and toil away by yourself, highly unlikely that you will make an impact in a short time frame.
Yeah. Now you need multiple partners to make an impactful solution. I agree with you. So considering what we are observing in present times, what are your comments on innovation in the present geopolitical context?
It's a very deep question.
It's a loaded question, I
Very deep
understand.
question.
Yeah.
So we're living in troubled times, right?
Yeah.
And I think the sensitivity is to avoid knee-jerk reactions and to have a global perspective so that one does not leap to conclusions or policy changes that may not be rational. So I'll use the example of research security and foreign interference. Right? We're all concerned with preserving integrity, with protecting our ideas, and working with partners who are like-minded or kindred spirits, right?
Yeah.
Who have the same ethical values. And we understand that. But there's been a great deal of activity in the last few months in Canada to try to impose regulations to control the types of partners one engages with. Now, I was in Australia for the 3 years before I took up this position at the University of Manitoba, and so I went through this
Yeah.
with the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Relationships with China were extremely strained. At the same time, relationships between the US and China were also very strained
Yeah.
over the Huawei incidents.
Yeah.
And so it got to the point where they too decided to bring in regulations, guidelines, clear partners, have preferred partners, and put in a whole bureaucracy to deal with this. The U.S. did the same. They had sanctions against certain companies. In Australia, for example, Huawei was banned.
Yeah.
Working with Huawei was banned. Same in the U.S. Right? So I come to Canada and I find that we're just starting that exercise.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
We're just getting on the bus and trying to deal with this issue of foreign interference. In the meantime, the situation with Huawei has changed. The CFO is no longer under house arrest in Vancouver. And what's more, the new Prime Minister of Australia, Albanese, last week met with President Xi Jinping
Wow.
to discuss the way forward on their 100-year plan. And they play the long game in China. And so they discussed the productive way forward. This week, President Joe Biden will also
Yes.
meet President Xi Jinping to
Yeah.
discuss the same thing. So they're past it. That's the message, right? So are we in Canada dealing with an old problem,
I see.
right? That in itself would not be that egregious, but what I fear is that it will have a chilling effect. Academics will not go into certain areas that they wish to pursue
That's
because it's
right.
too difficult.
That is right.
It's too high risk with certain partners. And so that chilling effect then will lead to mediocrity of our science and technology
Yeah.
in general. It's worse than that because if we don't have investment in research to make up for the missing partners, and we profit a great deal from our international partners. We make use of elaborate infrastructure. And to be perfectly honest, we gain a lot from their ideas.
Yeah.
It's not a one-way street,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And because of the selection processes in some of those countries, we have a lot and we take a lot, right? But my more serious concern is that we're setting up a system because of the lack of funding and because of the difficulties and bureaucracy in navigating this landscape, that we will be encouraging a brain drain
Yes.
from Canada. And I think we have to think very carefully about what we're doing here, because this could last for a decade if we go down this road. So the lesson, I think, is to look at other countries, have a global view, look at what Australia is doing, look at what the UK is doing,
yeah.
look at what the US is doing, and ask the critical question, did we miss the boat? And if so, why are we chasing the boat at this stage?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit harsh, but
No, this is a great answer,
but I
great
think that
perspective.
really is coming from. I deal with faculty every day, and they're very concerned.
Yeah.
And I'm not fabricating this. They have genuine concerns.
Yeah.
And when young graduate students see this taking place, it's not conducive to
That
them
is-
choosing this path as a career path,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And on that point, I do agree that it's a self-selected science that we will end up promoting because of the
Right.
concerns that you mentioned.
Right.
And brain drain is already happening because of the lack of funding for faculty members and for students. So this is going to add to those concerns on a bigger scale, as you had just described.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you're piling it on,
Yeah.
you're compounding the effects, you're exacerbating the issues, and a lot of faculty are getting turned off. Students are getting turned off. This is a bigger concern, right? Because you're affecting the next generation and the future workforce of Canada. So,
And as you noticed this at the University of Manitoba, I'm sure other universities are dealing with the same types of concern as well. So this is clearly a national challenge than just a localized challenge.
absolutely, and we all talk to one another,
Yeah.
right? We're not doing this in
Yeah,
isolation.
yeah.
So when we were asked to think about regulations where we would de-risk, right, working with some of the partners, we came up with those guidelines, right? So we talk freely among each other, and we understand the issues. So
This is great answer, and I really appreciate that. So our last question is, as you've seen today, there was some testimony about the work and contributions that CSPC has made towards the community. And so my last question is going to be focused on that. In your opinion, what is the value that you see of CSPC in the community in convincing and connecting with people in the landscape and the whole tri-council and the and so on and so forth?
it's a very good question, and I think CSPC launched. It's now very successful, and I think it's examining its identity. So it's timely. I think the value of CSPC, it's an arm's length organization, right?
Yeah.
It's not an advocacy group. It can bring people together to debate some very complex questions, and perhaps use that then to inform academic groups, and hopefully government will also listen when they read the reports that come out of the conferences.
Yeah.
Right. So having said that, you have to ask, what's the most valuable role of CSPC, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's being the convener, right? And coming back to my analogy of two-eyed seeing or multi-eyed seeing, it's the convener to bring together disparate views and people with very disparate views who can thrash it out, and have a lively discussion at the frustrated interfaces and come up with innovative solutions. I think that's the greatest value that CSPC can provide.
Thank you, and I agree with you. It's becoming a nucleation point to discuss those difficult
Right.
topics and challenges.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Pinto, again for spending time. It was a great conversation. We got some good perspective on some of the topics that we are dealing with today, and we are hoping to see you again next year for the CSPC conference.
Yes. Thank you. My pleasure.